realized that from the earliest of age, when I looked around me, I didn't see the epitome of healthy relationship. I didn't have really good role models, good examples. My parents, although I believe there was a ferocity of love there, they fought like cat and dog. They could be really nasty to each other. And so I mismatched that image from an early age, and I knew what it was not meant to be, not what it was meant to be, but what it was not meant to be.
Yeah.
And so I mean, looking at my grandparents, less volatile, but also there were funky things in the relationships. You know, there were undercurrents to the relationship that, as a youngster, I could tune into and still get whatever this is meant to be. It's not that. And I was a voracious reader from a very, very early age. From like 3-4 years of age, I mean, I would read simple books and then storybooks. And so I began to piece together my idea of the ideal relationship from storybooks. And what I was carried back to in the meditation then was that my overarching story has been one of being the white knight on a charger rescuing the maiden in distress. I mean, laughable and stereotypical, I know, and it was just what went in,
Yeah.
ostensibly. And this is like at a surface level. I'd identified as a Lancelot figure who had his shit together, who was brave and compassionate and rather saintly, kind of riding on his horse around the countryside looking for the maiden in distress to rescue. And when I look back at relationship, I see that to a really large extent, that's the role that I've played. I mean, it seems absurd looking back, but I've looked for partners who I at least perceived needed rescuing. They needed saving from something, from some circumstance, from themselves, from some emotional state, and I was the one to do the job. So, at a surface level, this grandiose image, I mean, loving, wholesome, grandiose, but here's the rub for it all. Underneath, I'm not Lancelot. Underneath, I'm Pip from Dickens' Great Expectations.
Wow.
And so I don't have the courage. I don't have the status. I don't have the wherewithal to really carry off this knightly self-image. And it's getting needled at from underneath all the time. It's getting undermined by this knowledge that who and what I am is less than.
Yeah.
That who and what I am is not capable. And so the image is of this big kind of requited love, the love that, there's the rescue that takes place, yes, there's the drama, there's the adventure, and then they all lived happily ever after.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
underneath is some woundedness that has a story of unrequited love in it.
Yeah.
And then when I look back and see the way that's played out, I mean, from this perspective, looking back, it's laughable. And at the time, a lot of pain because of the unreality of what was taking place in relationship. So that's my story, if you like. What share yours? Well, you must have had something in there. What was?
Well, I know growing up, similar situation where I had a very volatile upbringing, and I knew that was happening in the household was not something I ever wanted to emulate. And
Right.
but my grandparents, they were my ideal, and the grandparents. In the 1920s, my grandfather got his PhD in physics, and my grandmother got her master's in philosophy and in comparative religion.
That's
and
pretty
so,
radical for the 1920s.
yes, in those days, they were quite a radical couple because that women weren't going to university and certainly not getting advanced level degrees, and they fell deeply in love with one another. And my grandmother used to share with me the stories of their romance together, and how Grandpa, he came from a background of farmers, and he was the smartest of the 12 children. So he was the only one that they could afford to put to university. It was counted on that he would get, his PhD. And so he's this burly guy with big hands, and kind of stocky, and he's a farmer. And my grandmother, on the other hand, she was a lady. And even though in the 1920s she was a flapper as well, and a suffragette fighting for women's rights, and So the two of them, it was this love at first sight. And but my grandfather used to get incredibly jealous.
Mm.
And they had the dance cards at that time. And you were only, even if you were affianced, you could only allow yourself to dance with two dances with your partner, which means you had to dance, put on your dance card other people. And my grandfather,
It'd drive him nuts.
he just would literally go ballistic. And my grandmother said to him that she would never allow that, that love was too great. And if you loved freely and deeply, you would love with an open hand, like holding a bird, and with an open hand. And if the bird flew away, well, it was never yours. And if it came back, well, then it was there because it was there of its own volition. And she wanted a love like this.
Beautiful.
It's a beautiful, and so I used to just bathe in our discussions together. But what used to just enchant me so much was I too had read all the romances, and I used to love all the historical romances, and but I didn't need to get all my storybook notions from a book, because I had it there in living color and right before my eyes. And you know, in their 80s, my grandmother, she would still every day dress up like a lady for Grandpa. And my grandfather, at the end of the day, you know, after you get back from being dean of a university, and he'd be working in the garden and building and milking cows, etc., he would shower, he would dress in his Sunday best suit, and he would make when the sun went over the yardarm, he would make a cocktail for my grandmother, and the two of them would sit there in their Sunday best, and he would stare in her eyes, and he'd shake his head, and he would say to me, "Brandon, look at these hands, these big farmer's hands. How is it a big stocky old farmer got to have as his true love a woman as beautiful as your grandmother? How did I ever get to be so lucky?" And he literally, tears would come out the side of his eyes as he was in adoration of her. And he would put on the waltz music, and even with his bum leg, he would take her a turn around the living room. And so I had this whole image of what was possible, that in spite of the volatile upbringing I'd been brought up in, and all that came with that, I knew it was possible to find your true love, and that it could be noble and good, and it would last till the day you died. And so this was the image I had, and there was never any doubt in my mind that this is what I would manifest. It wasn't a question. This is what I was looking for. I was looking for my idealized version of a man who would adore me, who would worship me, who would love me, who would cry from the amount of love he felt for me. And until, you know, the grandma was 82 at the time, I'm talking about this particular memory, and he was 87, you know, and still in worshipful adoration. And so this was what I brought into my first marriage, really, with me.
So you had real live role models to, I don't know what, aspire to, let's say.
Yeah, not just to aspire to. There was no question that that's what I was going to be living.
And who did you need to be in order to set that up to attract that? Because as well as seeing the ideal, as well as imagining what an ideal relationship is like, I mean, my experience is that we show up as someone, we show up with a facade in order to attract that. So question to you, who did you need to be, what role did you need to play in order to put that into motion, in order to attempt to make that real?
Well, for me, it was I needed to be my grandmother.
Okay.
And so that meant someone wise, intelligent, someone who was a free thinker.
Right.
Someone who has a deeper wisdom than just society's wisdom. Someone who was giving, loving, compassionate, and noble. And anything that did not meet that, I had to deny in myself. So that meant that anger wasn't allowed. Unkind thoughts about other people were not allowed. Ignoble actions were not allowed. understanding other people's state.
So you modeled what you perceived your grandmother to be.
Her essence, yeah.
So tell me about the ideal man in that case, because I know in the past, and I'm kind of throwing this in there, you told me that you'd kind of imagined your perfect man to be a Richard Burton-like character, and that doesn't sound like your grandfather. So
No.
your ideal man, tell us about him.
Well, you know, I told you, and when I was like 8 years old, I saw Beckett.
Right.
And what I loved about that film was his nobility and his steadfastness.
Right.
And his absolute aristocratic almost sense of honor and truth.
Yes.
And so that's what it wasn't the
So it wasn't the man,
carousing.
it was the act, right? Okay,
It
all
was
right. I
the
just wanted to be
part
clear
he
on
was
that.
playing. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I was looking truthfully to be adored.
Right.
I wanted to be adored like my grandmother was adored. I wanted someone who was noble. I wanted someone who would love me above all else.
We could have danced a really fake dance a long time ago, you know,
Yeah.
because you wanted to be adored, I wanted to find someone to adore. I mean, when I explored that my ideal woman from years and years ago when I wound the clocks back would have been some fusion of the Virgin Mary, a fairy tale princess, and Raquel Welch from A Million Years BC, the film, you know. And it's a pretty tall order, but I really wanted someone that I could put on a pedestal and adore. I wanted this perfect, ideal idea of grace in a female form. And I mean, the thing is, these projections, they are just that, they're projections. They don't work, they're not real.
Yes.
And to live from that place of authenticity causes pain.
Yeah.
So it might be scary but useful if we explored that a little bit.
Yeah. Would you like to maybe invite everyone here in our studio audience and all of you that are watching, would you, maybe we can kind of explore some of the idealizations that we've brought with us into relationships, some of the storybook, legendary notions of what we brought, expectations really, and idealizations of what we expected of ourselves, the roles we expected to play, what we expected of our partners, the roles that we expected them to play, perhaps some of the storybook notions. I know that I definitely had some sense of nobility in there that I was expecting from my partner.
So good to explore and to bear in mind that there's a lot of pain with this type of identification and projection in relationship. And for me, for sure, you might think, okay, it's a funny thing. So you want this fusion between three impossible ideals to be the woman, and you play the role you need to play in order to attract that and to live that out to the point of happily ever after. And it really doesn't work that way. I mean, for me, what I experienced was that I would spin some illusion around the woman I was in relationship with. I would hold her in an ideal light, and would definitely put a woman on a pedestal, and then over a period of time would realize, that ideal, she's not that. Well, of course she's not that.
Yeah.
But that would be a letdown every time, and what I would do is I would blame, I would get angry, and because of the type of fixation that's been here, would get like into a resentful, blaming place that would needle at the foundation of our relationship just because my ideal wasn't real. Well, of course it wasn't real.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize that, the shit was here, that the issue was my fixation and my story, and it had nothing to do with my partner. That I was looking for my partner to give me something, and impossible.
Yeah, and they couldn't live up to expectations.
And never could.
And when we have expectations,
that
I
is
do
absolutely
feel
true.
that they kill. Expectation kills reality of the moment.